It's 9 a.m. Okay, perfect. So we're going to officially start our book club book club review. So I am Rebecca Blake Thompson of remake.world. I'm the senior contributor for content and education, and we are going to be speaking with author, journalist Lauren Bravo, and we're going to be discussing her book, which we read this month, How to Break Up with Fast Fashion. And at the end, I want you to talk about your newer book that's coming out as well, because that sounds really exciting as well. Maybe it's the Spice Girls one. I want you to talk about Spice Girls. Awesome, because that's next on my list. So Lauren, before we get started, for anyone who might be joining this call that is totally new to this, maybe they joined because they just started following Remake, or they stumbled across a hashtag that got them to join this. You dive into the book, but for anyone who might not have a clear vision of what does fast fashion mean, what does that mean to you? So when you say how to break up with fast fashion, what does that mean?
So it's one of the many, many terms, I think, in this world that doesn't have a very clear, agreed definition. So that is confusing for a lot of people. When I talk about fast fashion, for me, it's characterized by two things. So price, low prices generally, what would be considered very accessible prices for a lot of people, certainly more accessible than fashion was in decades past. But it's also pace. So it's the sheer speed and volume at which clothes are produced, and that is mind-blowing when you read the figures of how many clothes are being churned out by big high street fashion brands, your Zara's, your H&M's every year. It is more clothing than anyone could possibly need or wear or buy, and of course the result of that is, for the garment workers, it means that they are being pushed to absolute breaking point, exploited, to churn out these kind of ridiculous quantities at such a speed. It means that everywhere along the line resources are being pushed far more than they should, and then it means we're ending up with so many more clothes in our stores and in our wardrobes that inevitably will end up burnt or in landfill, or falling into that kind of bloated pass the parcel of secondhand clothing that goes around the world. And part of the reason I called it How to Break Up with Fast Fashion is because I wanted it to be a very accessible guide. And I wasn't writing for people who buy designer clothes, although that is a whole other problem, and I've had people say, well, why are you focusing on fast fashion and not necessarily on the higher end stuff, which we know can be just as damaging, it can be just as exploitative, and that is a real common misconception. But I wanted to speak to people who essentially shopped like I used to shop. I wanted it to be something that was a real entry point. And fast fashion means mainstream consumer accessible fashion, and that is part of the problem. It's the fact that it is an entrance point for so many people. It is the vast majority of people buy fast fashion, and so it just felt like the most appropriate place to start.
I think that's exactly the point, is that fast fashion has the biggest impact on our planet, and it is what is, the majority of consumers are purchasing, and engaging with fast fashion brands. So when we talk about, a lot of people, I agree, when I have these conversations, sometimes it's like, well, why do you only focus on certain brands, or why do you only focus on certain, types of clothing? And the reality is we can't fix everything all at once. So how can we start with where the biggest abuses are happening and the biggest impact could be made? One thing that you just said in your self-definition of, what is fast fashion, you talked about the pace, how the pace is a key defining factor. And I want to tie that back to the convo we were having over email last night, where, and you address this in the book as well, how we talk about, endless growth, the capitalist model that always requires endless growth, perpetual growth for brands, for shareholders, for profits, is unnatural. It's completely unnatural on a planet that has very finite resources. And so I think it's very important to make this connection to a lot of consumers who don't think about this, that, part of the fuel for the fire, that, one of the things that fuels this beast is the particular economic model in which a lot of these fashion brands are operating in. And so, you know, I spoke to you about how this kind of consumer addiction and these consumer behaviors are not our sole responsibility. We've been programmed to exist in a society that's always pushing this need for more on us, telling us, and you go into this, which I love that you acknowledge this, how it actually gets into our psyche and tells us that we need more, that we need to look better, that we need to buy new things constantly, that we can't be seen in something twice, that, you know, we have to be on trend, on season, all new, nothing old. And we have become so programmed through these marketing messages and through this society, the way that society accepts this, that I think for a lot of consumers, they're just on autopilot. They don't even think about it. It's just natural, you know?
Well, there's the word that you just used there, need. And I'm fascinated by the way that marketing, fashion marketing over the last kind of few decades has performed this amazing trick where they have convinced us that things that we want are things that we need. Mm-hmm. And I think that somewhere along the way, we've confused those two feelings. And in the book, I talk about want, need, and like, mm-hmm. and how I think for me personally, when I was sort of breaking up with fast fashion and stepping away from buying new clothing, a big breakthrough was when I realized that I needed to distinguish between when I needed something. So when, you know, I actually needed a piece of clothing for a functional purpose, or you know, something had worn out, when I wanted something, so it would be nice to have it in my life, but it wasn't a necessity, and when I actually just liked something but didn't even really need to own it. Mm-hmm. And I have this kind of almost idea that it would be nice if we could get to a point where you can look at beautiful clothes and appreciate them as beautiful clothes, but you don't need to possess them. And we're kind of getting halfway there with rental and stuff. And I know we'll talk about that stuff later, I'm sure. But yeah, I think that once you kind of see the strings, you know, you see the way that marketing works to kind of dupe us into that consumer mindset where we just constantly have to have the next thing. It kind of, it's like the spell is broken a little bit, you know. You have those moments where you suddenly go, oh, I see what they've done there. You know, whether it's the language that they use for marketing, the things that they say, the kind of, you know, must-haves. It's a phrase that we are so used to reading in advertising and in magazines and things, and we don't really even stop to question it. But why is it a must-have? Why must I have it? You know?
Yeah. And how can someone else who doesn't even know me know what I must have? You know, it's so fascinating. I love that you just mentioned that, because I was absolutely going to bring that up at some point. But, you know, again, how you can think about something so many times and know a subject so well, but then somebody says that one little thing and you have that light bulb moment. I love when you said that in the book. You said, you know, how can we still appreciate an object for its beauty and for its design and its craftsmanship and its feel and its texture, and then walk away from it? How can we still see and appreciate something but not need to have it? And I think you bring up a great point, and you talk about this in the book, how because of this conditioning, you know, we've been told, and I think it's also kind of operating from this mindset, which I'm guilty of as a consumer, this mindset of scarcity, that like, oh, if I don't grab it, if I don't get it right now, it's going to disappear. And, you know, we're kind of riding these emotional highs that it gives us. Like, we see it and then we think about, who am I going to be in that dress? How is it going to make me feel? Everyone's going to look at me and think I look so beautiful, and I have to have it. If I don't get it, I'm not going to get that feeling. Whereas we can enjoy that feeling just looking at it and saying, wow, somebody put thought and attention to detail in that, and that's a beautiful dress, and it's going to look beautiful on someone, and I can keep walking, and that's okay, you know?
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible? I think if we can get to that place. And it's, I mean, when you're saying about, you know, the kind of the emotional process we go through when we think that we want something, it's a chemical process as well. So I talk in the book to a brilliant psychologist, Dr. Dion Terrelong, who is also a stylist and specializes in fashion. And it's a dopamine hit. So that feeling of craving something and then buying it, it's the same kind of little micro hit of dopamine that we get when we get a notification on our phones. You know, I think we're kind of getting a bit more clued into that kind of addictive behavior. But I don't think we stop to think that actually, yeah, we are so conditioned by, you know, decades of this kind of marketing to believe that we are constantly searching for that next kind of little hit of dopamine, and that we can't get it without possessing something. And I find that really interesting to think about. Yeah, I mean,
I love that, because one of the themes that we'll continue to talk about that you bring up in the book, you know, is this idea that it's actually quite, you know, a lot of people are fearful of, well, if I can't always get the new thing, and I can't, you know, for a lot of people, it's just a ritual. You know, I love to go shopping on Saturdays, or after brunch, or after a few mimosas, or with my girlfriends, or whatever. And I think a lot of people look at this breakup as a sort of deprivation, and it's scary, and if I can't have those things that do give me that high and make me feel good. But one thing which you talk about in the book, which I really love, because this did happen for me as well, and it's still a journey, but it's actually very liberating, and it's very freeing, and it's very, it's like this, you mentioned, I think one time, like this kind of like peacefulness just washes over you, because it's taking away all of those mental gymnastics of, can I afford this? Should I get this? Do I already have something like this? Where can I wear this? How can I work it? It's exhausting to do all that work, and to be able to walk by something and not buy it is so much easier.
Completely. I mean, it became almost like a part-time job for me. Like, I think it's so funny. I had a couple of editorial notes from from an editor when I'd written a piece about this. Actually, the kind of the level to which you were shopping and thinking about clothes all the time. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, I'm normal. Like, there are so many people out there who were exactly the same that I was. And I could never turn it off in my mind. You know, it was like I was either shopping, or I was thinking about shopping. I was scrolling for my next fix. I had a list on my phone constantly of the next things I needed in my wardrobe, because you're on this treadmill, you know, it never ends. And you tell yourself, well, if I buy that jacket, then I'll be done. I won't need anything else for 6 months, you know, my wardrobe is complete. And as soon as you bought that jacket, suddenly you think, but I do need that pair of boots, actually. And then you get the boots and you think, but if I just had one of those dresses. And it was exhausting. It's physically and mentally draining. Like, I used to come home sometimes after work, and it would be like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I had just popped to the shops for like an hour just to get my, you know, like a birthday card or something like that, and then hours go by and I'm still walking from one shop to the next, just thinking like, one more store, you know, just in case. And you're right, it's that scarcity mindset. It's that idea that if you don't find that item, you will somehow miss out on being a better, shinier version of yourself. And as soon as you manage to make that break away, yeah, you do. I mean, it takes a little while. Like, don't get me wrong, I had withdrawal pangs for months, you know. But once that starts to kind of ebb away, it is freedom. It is. You've got time back. You've got money you didn't have before. You've got more energy. You know, I read more books now. Genuinely, I fit more into my week. And the thing is, I'm still thinking about clothes, but it's just not all consuming in the way that it was.
It's so analogous for a breakup. Like, more time, more energy, more freedom, more money. Like, I can focus on being a better me. That's the perfect outcome of a breakup.
That's it. I didn't get a haircut. I think that's about the only thing. But also, you know, back to what you were saying about people thinking it's a deprivation. And I was so aware that when I sat down to write this book, and I was very early in my journey as well, so I'd been cutting down on my consumption. I've been buying more and more secondhand and stuff for a few years. But I was only a few months into my complete cold turkey when I sat down to start working on this book. And I was so aware that I wanted it to be a guide for people who love clothes. Because I think there's such maybe it's a misconception, or maybe it's actually based on quite a lot of, you know, reality. There's this idea that if you're going to make that jump over to the world of sustainable fashion, and you're going to start caring much more about the ethics of what you wear, that you somehow have to sacrifice loving style, you know, and that you have to sort of resign yourself to a life of like shapeless beige hemp smock dresses. And I was just so determined that I wanted to write it from a position of still loving clothes and still being able to celebrate all the good things that clothes can bring, like, you know, community. And they've always traditionally, kind of anthropologically speaking, I guess, been a way of identifying with people and marking out who you belong with and who you don't, and sort of finding your people and communicating who you are without speaking. And I think all of that stuff is just as important now as it ever was. So yeah, I never want people to feel like by giving up fast fashion they have to give up a love of clothes. And actually I feel so much more kind of passionate about what I wear now because I know the story behind each of those pieces.
Absolutely. I think that actually, and no judgment on anyone who's in the fast fashion addiction right now, but I actually think to truly love clothes, right, you have to respect them and to truly honor them and to truly, deeply love and care about fashion, which is why my career segued into sustainable fashion, is because I loved it so much upon realizing how toxic it was and how abusive it was, and all of the detrimental effects of it. I didn't just say, oh, okay, let me walk away from it. I said, no, this is something I love so much. How can I make it better? And so I think when you make that breakup with fast fashion and you move towards more sustainable fashion, your love actually deepens because you gain a new respect for the clothing. You gain a new appreciation, for, vintage junkies like you and I love that you shop your grandmother's closet so much. You actually start to have, I think, more of an emotional connection. If a shirt is $5 and I wear it once and I throw it away, there was no love there. There was no respect there. There was no deep emotional engagement with that piece. So I think that love for fashion, actually really deepens when you kind of switch your journey and you can enjoy it so much more in so many ways.
Yeah.
Bring up another point, which is, you talk about how fast fashion brands aren't interested in creating clothes to solve our problems, right? They're focused on offering the ever elusive feeling that you'll feel better. You just talked about this, that you'll feel better if you get that one jacket and that one boot, this is the last one and then I don't need more. But they're in the business of keeping you chasing the feeling, right? Always chasing. And the reality is, until you make that breakup, and you aren't chasing, you've just stopped, you're not chasing that feeling anymore, there's no end. It's infinite. There's no way to get to that perfect jacket or that perfect boot or that perfect party dress, because the whole business of fast fashion is to convince you that you every season you need a new one, and the one you have is old and off trend, and here's this new one you need. And it's really fascinating to think about the fact that we're giving our money to people who are supposed to be offering a product and service to us to meet a need, yet their whole business is to make sure they don't meet the need so that we have to keep coming back. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this idea of forced obsolescence is something that I kind of discovered when I was writing the book. I sort of knew the phrase, but I hadn't really thought much more about what it means. And, the way it was explained to me is the way that, your iPhone basically dies like clockwork every 2 years. So you have to get a new one. And fast fashion, perhaps that wasn't what they were planning in the beginning, but over the decades, it has become almost that, in that those clothes are made so quickly and so cheaply and so poorly in so many instances that they are not going to last you years, and actually it's one of the things that infuriates me particularly is when people talk about how fast fashion makes fashion more accessible for people who are on lower incomes, which is a really interesting point that I think we have to discuss. But actually it's particularly people who can't afford to buy more expensive clothes are being cheated the worst, right? Because they need clothes to last, they need clothes to do a job. And if your clothes are constantly falling apart, so many fast fashion items that I've bought over the years, you wear them a few times and then they shrink in the wash, or the hem starts unraveling, or the fabric just never looks as good after a couple of wears. And also those trends are so transient. They are not designed to last you for 5 years, 10 years. They're hard to mend. There's no repair service. You can't go back and get the button that fell off, that kind of thing. So yeah, the industry has conspired to keep us constantly shopping. And I think when you say about how we're perpetually kind of looking for the next item that we think we need and working towards this kind of ideal that never arrives. What we're really working towards is an idealized version of ourselves, I think, as well. And I know that, you know, I was definitely guilty in the past of buying clothes that they didn't quite fit the way I wanted to, or they didn't quite look the way I wanted to. They didn't really make me feel brilliant, but they were close enough. And I think it's that kind of compromise. You know, we believe that it's our duty to live up to the clothes and not the other way around. And that was like another one of my little epiphanies, the day that I realized that actually when I'm shopping, it's the clothes that should be auditioning for me. And, you know, I should be, I think the analogy I've got in the book is like Simon Cowell on the X Factor or American Idol or whatever. You know, you should be sitting there kind of going, no, not good enough. Like, what have you done to deserve a place in my wardrobe? But I think for most of us, it's the other way around. We go shopping and we kind of feel like we are not quite good enough to measure up to fashion. And so we keep buying in the hope that one day we'll buy that elusive thing that makes us the perfect version of ourselves. And of course it's just a dupe. It's just a massive con.
Massive. And that vetting criteria can also apply to, you know, not just are you good enough for me, but I think, you know, another way to apply that is, are you, so I'm talking to the garment like it's a person, but are you the garment good enough for the people who made you, you know, the workers that made you? How much did they get paid? The chemicals that went into you, how toxic are they? You know, the brand that you're supporting, what does their CEO stand for? What does their board stand for? So we can't just look at, you know, clothes and treat them like they're this very, you know, kind of inanimate object with no meaning, because they carry incredible significance. You know, in the hands that have touched them and made them, the people's pockets who are being lined with your purchases. You know, we can't just keep detaching ourselves from, oh, it's just, you know, I reposted on my social the other day, it's just one cheap t-shirt said 8 billion people, you know? And so we can't just keep acting like, oh, this little choice, this little purchase, this little thing doesn't matter, because there's so many human lives at stake in every one of those little purchases. And so it absolutely needs to be, is this item of clothing worthy of me? And it also needs to be, is my money and my purchase, you know, is this item worthy of me supporting what went into it and what it stands for, and how it's going, you know, how that purchase is going to affect other things.
Oh, completely. And I think that is something that people are very slowly starting to wake up to, this idea that every time we buy anything, we are voting with our wallets. And I think that that's actually another good way of kind of getting through to people is, again, you're not kind of reframing quitting fast fashion as that giving something up as a deprivation. You are framing it as an opportunity to invest in the kind of world you want to live in. And I think that, you know, when people know the story, when they can say, oh yeah, this dress was made by artisans who were paid a living wage, they were treated well, I know where they live, I maybe know their names even, you know, I know that the farmer that grew these crops was not exploited, that they were not kind of co-opted into these terrible monopolies and you know, forced to pay more and more and more for pesticides, all of the things that happen with fibers. I think when you can tell people about every kind of step along the way of that production process, it means that you have that emotional connection that you were talking about. And I think that's a positive thing. But unfortunately, you know, I think that when people get overloaded by the kind of reality of just how terrible things are, and, you know, we know they are terrible, I think that there is a kind of instinctive reaction in a lot of people to bury their heads in the sand. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do, is to inform people, to educate people, to kind of wake them up to the truth of those garments and how they are so cheap, you know, because it's not a coincidence. Like if, you know, if you're buying a $5 t-shirt, then someone somewhere is paying for it. But I think it's such a fine balance, because it's easy for us to sit here and say, but if someone feels like that $5 t-shirt is all they can, you know, it's maybe the only thing that can cheer them up that week, or it's kind of something that they have been taught they need, it's you can see why people perhaps just sort of stick their finger in their ears and la it away. They just don't want to know. And I think that's something I'm continually kind of puzzling over, is where is that sweet spot in the middle? How do you educate people, make them understand, kind of help wake them up to that, but without making them feel so overwhelmed by the awfulness of it that they almost feel like they can't make a difference.
I think you bring up such a great point there in terms of how we don't want to think about that. And I want to, acknowledge that is such a privilege to not have to think about it. We could have many more conversations about the colonial imperial model of capitalism that goes to other countries to exploit the workers there, use them for cheap labor, pollute their waters, make the clothes there. And then they extract it. After they extract that human resource, they extract the natural resources, then they bring it and they put it in a shiny shopping mall. We don't really have to think about it because we didn't have to walk past those polluted rivers to get to the mall. We didn't have to, see those garment workers, struggling, living, in impoverished conditions, in unsanitary conditions, not being able to support their families. We're so far removed from it that we don't have to acknowledge it. And that's such a privilege, that we can, take all these things and exploit them and export them and then, package them up all shiny and pretty. And that's what the brands want. They don't want us to think about what had to happen to these clothes to get here. They don't want you to think about that. They just want you to think and, about what you need to have, what you have to buy, how it's going to make you feel. And that's why all the marketing goes there, right? And that's why there's been such an incredible push for transparency in the sustainable fashion movement, because the more we are educated as consumers, the more we can raise our hands and speak up and use our voice to these brands to say, wait, you're doing what? Right. Like, that's completely unacceptable.
Yeah. And people care when they know. I mean, there was the Experiment Fashion Revolution did a few years ago, which I talk about in the book, where they put this vending machine in a square in Berlin and offered people $2 t-shirts, €2 t-shirts. But before the t-shirt was dispensed, they had to watch a video introducing them to the garment worker that made that t-shirt and telling them just how little she was paid and the conditions that she had to work in. And then at the end, they were asked, do you still want your $2 t-shirt? And I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but it
9 out of 10.
Everybody, yeah.
I think 9 out of 10 people said no.
And that's the thing. I don't think people are at heart as selfish as we maybe kind of dismiss them as. I think it's people don't know. And brands, you're completely right. Brands are so good at putting up those smoke screens, and particularly even brands that are calling themselves sustainable and ethical. Of course, greenwashing a lot of the time is just deflecting our attention. It's kind of waving around one positive action so that we don't look over here and see everything bad that they are still doing. And that is, a whole other problem to tackle, is kind of how do we stop brands who have these huge marketing budgets pulling literally the wool over our eyes and continuing to treat people like dirt and treat the planet like dirt behind the scenes. That just, it's so frustrating, particularly when people are buying from those brands because they want to feel like they're doing something positive. And it breaks my heart every time that someone will kind of reference a brand that they believe to be doing pretty well, or they'll say, oh, I bought this from this sustainable range, or it's made with viscose, isn't that good? Or, and I hate having to be the person that's like,
well, you and I talked about this, I guess it was this morning for you and last night for me. You and I talked about this, about Marks and Spencer. They're doing this campaign to be more sustainable, to, have more transparency, to clean up their act. But then we at Remake, uncovered them as one of the very, first brands and one of the largest offenders in our Pay Up campaign when, COVID-19 started and brands were massively canceling, and to clarify for anyone who's confused, not just like future orders that hadn't been made yet. There were clothes that had already been made by these garment workers. The work had already been done. And they were at these factories in Bangladesh. and brands said, oh, we're not, even though you already made that, we're not paying for it, and just left them there, you know? And
what other industry would they get away with that as well? You know, it's just, you know, that really highlights just how terribly kind of fashion and garment workers, and that's 1 in 6 people on the planet, just how little they are valued. And you know, it's appalling. So Marks and Spencer's was so gutting for me as well, because I've always kind of had them as, if there's one brand on the British high street, you know, when people come to me and they're like, where do I buy underwear? I'm like, okay, well, here's some lovely sustainable brands, but you know, I've always been like, as a last resort, look, if you can't go anywhere else, M&S, they're doing pretty well compared to most of them. And there's a whole little chapter in the book about that, about how, you know, I don't want to see all of these kind of heritage brands just die. You know, I want to believe that actually they could reform, remake themselves, and really become a model for how to do sustainable production and ethical production on a large-ish scale. Obviously, it all needs to be smaller. And so, of course, when I read that they were one of the brands cancelling those orders and not paying their workers, I was just like, damn it, you know, I was rooting for you. Like, it's,
well, you know, greenwashing it's a big trend. It's not going anywhere. And as consumers shift to wanting to make more ethical, responsible purchases, brands are waking up and saying, oh, well, maybe if I just, you know, there's no legislation, you can call something sustainable, and there's not a law that says you have to meet certain criteria to call your clothing ethical, or to call your clothing sustainable, or to call your clothing eco-friendly. Any brand in the world could put that on their website, and they're totally allowed to do that, right? So I think that, you know, it's the plus minus. The plus is that, you know, consumers are waking up to this, and brands are waking up to this. The negative is that a lot of brands are taking advantage of the fact that consumers care about this, and they're, you know, being deceitful, they're being dishonest. And unfortunately, what that means is that it falls back on us as consumers to do the work. We have to do more research. We have to ask more questions. We just can't be asleep at the wheel anymore, you know? And you bring about the point of voting with your wallet, you know? And the reality is that it's your money. You should be very, very particular about who you give it away to, you know?
And you worked hard for that money.
Exactly.
Green. Yeah.
And I think one thing that people don't, you know, I always, whenever I talk about voting with your wallet, and so anyone who's attending that's seen me speak before will know that I always bring this up, because I think this distinction is very important. You know, people say, oh, well, you know, if it's not an NGO, or if it's not like directly contributing to a charity, how am I really voting with my wallet? Well, the reality is, for these very big brands, when you spend money with them, they typically have, and you talk about this in your book as well, a white male board, white male CEO, you know, white male shareholders. And I'm generalizing, of course, but statistically, that is the predominant picture of these large fast fashion brands.
12.5% of global fashion companies have a female CEO.
Exactly. And so when you spend your money with those brands, that money is directly paying those men. It's lining their pockets. It's paid in dividends and bonuses. And the reality is, you say, okay, well, how is that a vote? Those are the biggest donors to politicians. They pay for the biggest lobbying campaigns that lobby for laws and regulations that favor what they're doing and don't necessarily favor your individual rights and your individual, you know, things that you stand for and you believe in, or your community. So you are absolutely voting, because that money trickles up to someone who's then going to spend it to add power and add fuel to the people that they want in power, the people that they want in positions of influence. So if you can, you know, do the research and educate yourself and spend the money somewhere that you know it's going to a good place, and starve it from the brands who are using it unethically, that can have a huge effect.
Yeah. Oh, completely. And I think even, you know, during the pandemic, it has become all the more important to be supporting small businesses that you believe in. You know, they are the ones that need that support. So it's kind of twofold. It's, as you say, you're taking that money and that vote away from people who don't deserve it, who are just going to, you know, damage the planet and society further. But then you're also using it to actually boost somebody who needs it. And that could be, you know, spending money with Black owned businesses, making sure that you are kind of helping, you know, in whatever small way you can to try and tip the balance, you know, of society's many inequalities. And I think, like I said before as well, I think it's just a really positive thing to use your money somewhere that you believe in, and prove that that market is there as well. And, you know, the more people that do that, the more confidence there is in smaller brands doing sustainable fashion well. Perhaps the more investment they can get, the better they can kind of grow their business. It does all help. I think we have to believe that we may just be one little person, but we can make a difference.
I think this is a good segue, greenwashing. And then you like brought it, zoomed into focus with, you know, the COVID, the pandemic happening, and with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so greenwashing is also kind of in tandem with this performative, you know, allyship and, you know, performative ethical justice right now. And I have to read this. One of the quotes you have in the book is, "Oh, here's a feminist t-shirt raising funds for charity. Oh, wait, it was made in a sweatshop. Here's a brand making strides to champion diversity. Oh, wait, every single one of their executives is a white man named Steve. Oh, wait, never mind. Canceled. Shut it down." You know, it's so important in the context of all of these issues that are, you know, just so present. And we're starting to realize how every little brand, every little product, every little, you know, person in a position of power has this ripple effect into so many other areas. And we just can't afford to, you know, be contributing to, you know, the feminist t-shirts that were made by women who are getting paid, you know, pennies an hour, you know, in horrible conditions.
Yeah, completely. I mean, you know, it's a really difficult balance, because one of the things I believe a lot in is that we shouldn't have to be perfect before we're allowed to join in the conversation. So, you know, I don't believe in kind of expecting complete perfection across the board overnight, because that's unrealistic. It won't happen. But I don't believe you can call yourself a sustainable and an ethical brand if you are not inclusive. And, you know, that means being size inclusive, which is a massive issue still in the world of sustainable fashion. Like, it is getting better, but slowly. And it means, of course, you know, making sure that you have people of all ethnicities, of, you know, different abilities, of like all sexualities. We need to be kind of making sure that people are visible on those kind of brand Instagram feeds, because all too often you'll come across a brand and you'll be like, oh, okay, this looks promising. They're making things sustainably and they're using lovely fabrics and whatever. And then you go down the feed and it's all identical thin white women. And my new favorite hobby is kind of, every time I come across a brand like that, I will send them an email kind of saying, you know, hey, love the clothes, love what you're doing. What about all this other stuff that you're not doing? Because it just isn't.
Do they respond? Do they reply?
Yeah, so far, yeah, they do. Great. It's often a little bit defensive. Like, you'll just get, we're a really small brand and, you know, we're just starting up and we're kind of getting there, which, you know, I don't know to what extent that's really an excuse. But yeah, and I mean, the sizing is something that comes up all the time when I sort of do events, and when I talk about this stuff, is that people will say, look, I want to be able to buy sustainable clothes. I don't like buying fast fashion, but I can't find anything in my size. You know, secondhand, vintage, there is a real size privilege with that. You know, it's much easier to find small clothes in vintage. And so I never want to be that person that's going, oh, this is easy, you know, anyone can do this. I think we have to really recognize all the sort of various privileges that each person has. And even, you know, it's a bit of a luxury of time to do that research, or to trawl vintage stores, or to sort of find those brands. Not everybody has that if you've got like 3 kids at home and you're worrying about that. So I think that, yeah, brands should be kind of taking some of that burden and responsibility off our shoulders. It shouldn't be down to us to have to lobby for this stuff. It should be down to them to go, okay, well, what's the fairest way to cater for people? And I think we're still figuring that out, but we've got to keep shouting for it, you know, and particularly those of us that have platforms and those of us that are in positions where we actually can kind of talk to brands. I have a dream that I think I think the future of influencing as a career needs to be being that bridge between your followers and brands, and actually using that platform to influence brands in a really positive way, rather than influencing your followers to buy stuff that they don't need. It should be about influencing brands to do better.
Absolutely.
I'm way off topic there, but
yeah, reverse influencing. I love that. I think you bring up such a good point, and I want to make sure for anyone who's on the call that feels like, you know, especially, you know, I think, Lauren, you and I take for granted that we've been in this movement for a while now, and so a lot of these things seem kind of, you know, obvious. Well, this is what you should do and this is how you should do it. But for anyone who's listening, that this is totally new information for you, it's very, very important that we spread the message that this sustainable fashion should be about non-judgment. There's no judgment for being where you are and having done what you've done. And there's no expectation ever of perfection. Lauren and I are still not perfect. You know, there's still not perfection. We don't want to spread that message. What we champion here at Remake is just start somewhere, just anywhere, start somewhere, you know, wherever you can start to make a little change. And if you can maintain a feeling of curiosity, so that you're always just asking a few more questions, you're always just looking a little bit deeper, you're always just, you know, trying to, you know, you bring up in the book, like, do I have to buy something new, or might it already exist in a vintage store somewhere? Or might I love that you champion borrowing amongst your girlfriends. Could I, if I really need something, could I just borrow it from someone? You know, you just posted recently on your Instagram that you just got a dress back that you had lent to someone and it felt new again, you know? So the only way that sustainable fashion will ever work is if it's fully accessible to everyone. And you just said this, regardless of your size, your skin color, your income, you know, it has to be accessible to everyone. So please don't think that we're telling you have to do everything we're talking about. But if you take one little nugget and you can start with that, again, if 8 billion people started somewhere, that would have a massive, massive impact. I think that I want to read another quote that you have in the book, because it also talks about the importance, and I just mentioned this, of understanding where you've been, right? Because a lot of people think like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, Marie, you said this, Marie Kondo my closet, throw out everything that's unethical and kind of have a clear conscience and a fresh start, you know? But that's only bound to lead to you falling back into the same patterns and the same traps. It's like, we're not expecting you to just like have amnesia and forget everything wrong you did and wake up a perfect sustainable fashion person. You talk about how understanding where we have been and why we did what we did and who and what that means about who we are is so critical. So I want to read a quote from the book. And you said this in regards to 30 wears, right? Before you buy anything, ask yourself, will I wear it 30 times? It's a very good deterrent to stop you buying clothes you cannot commit to, but it's also helpful as a retroactive way to examine your shopping errors. Look at the clothes you own that you have worn 30 times and ask yourself, why? Is it a certain fabric or a color that you always go back to, a certain shape, a certain I'm paraphrasing now, a certain historical period you love? Is it more expensive classic pieces or kooky vintage items? And I think that's so important, because a lot of times, you know, especially being influenced by marketing and sustainable fashion brands, that a lot of them look very similar. A new one will launch and I'm like, oh, this is that brand. And then I look at the name and I'm like, oh, wait, this is a new brand. You know, we can't all fit that look, right? And we shouldn't. We don't need to. So what's more important is understanding, by looking at our closet, wait, who am I? What are the things I love that I always go to? And how can I buy that secondhand? How can I rent that? How can I borrow that? How can I swap that? So I'd love for you to talk about that, because that really resonated with me, that kind of retroactive look at what we have done to know where we should go.
Yeah, oh, completely. So, I mean, something I've been talking a lot about over the last few months while everybody's been at home with a lot of time on their hands is how to do a kind of a wardrobe clear out that is more mindful, because I think that is a really brilliant place to start. And it's always where I recommend people start is, you know, before you rush out to the shops and buy a whole load of new sustainable stuff, start with what you already own, you know. So the most sustainable item is the one already in your wardrobe. You know, you hear that motto a lot now, and it's so completely true. And I think that there are so many lessons in that. So one of the big triggers for me was a couple of years ago, I moved house and I was clearing out years, probably like 10 years worth, I guess, of shopping errors, you know, things that I had bought and not worn, things that I had forgot I even owned, things that were actually perfectly nice. I was digging things out and going, oh yeah, like, why don't I wear this? And the only answer I could come up with a lot of the time was just because I bought something else, and then this just got pushed to the back of a drawer or the back of the wardrobe and I forgot I had it, or maybe I bought it but I didn't really have like the right trousers to go with it, or you know, I was just waiting for the right shoes to come along, and all of those. And I think so many of us are kind of guilty of doing that. And when you sort of go through your wardrobe, and I always make people, when they do a wardrobe clear out, pile it all on your bed, and this is a bit Marie Kondo, but go through each item and ask yourself, how many times honestly did I wear this? And if it's not very many, why? And often it will be something like, I bought this for a life that I don't really lead, you know. So a lot of the time we will buy things for, I don't know, dinner parties that we don't go to, nightclubs we don't go to. Like, I, you know, have had various dalliances over my life with wanting to be the kind of archetypal chic French woman, the sort of crisp white shirt and a trench and a pair of immaculately cut black trousers. And I have had to make my peace now at the grand age of 32. That is not ever going to be me. Like, that's not my style, you know. I'm a kind of wafty 60s hippie kind of ridiculous maximalist. That is my style. But all, you know, because we fall victim to marketing, we tell ourselves maybe every couple of years, oh, okay, I need to have another go at being Audrey Hepburn, right? Like, so I think that, yeah, actually really being honest with yourself and getting to grips with the clothes you already own, you can learn so many lessons from that. And also, yeah, knowing your own personal style, because I think when you have a strong sense of what you love to wear and what makes you feel good, and that doesn't always have to be the same throughout your life, you know. I think it's fine to be a bit of a magpie and have different moods and, you know, go through different phases. But when you have a strong idea of what makes you happy, you are less susceptible to trends. I think, you know, that marketing then can start to roll off you like water off a duck's back. And you get better at seeing these trends come along every year and going, do you know what? That's not for me. But I think that the problem comes when you don't have that strong sense of your own style. You can often end up in this position where you are just trying to be whoever the adverts want you to be that week. And yeah, I think that is you know, where a lot of us go wrong.
Well, and you champion rental. And the thing is, like, if you want to have your Bardot, Audrey Hepburn moment, then just rent it. Try it on. That doesn't mean you have to commit to owning something, you know? And I think that's one thing, you know, that you touch on in the book, that, you know, ownership is something to be respected and to be valued. To actually invest in owning something is a big commitment that we need to take seriously. If we're not ready to own it and wear it a minimum of 30 times, and if we are not willing to mend it the second it's slightly damaged, or if we're not willing to take it to the cleaners and have it properly cared for, we just shouldn't own it in the first place. If you're just wanting to dabble and try a new style and experiment, you know, there's so many ways to do that nowadays, you know, from the rental options to swapping with your girlfriends to, you know, borrowing things from friends. Like, there's just so many ways. So you can still, you know, you and I are both, you know, maximalist, you know, kind of big.
Oh, look at my sleeves. Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, being sustainable doesn't mean, and you talk about this in the book, doesn't mean you have to be some like crunchy granola version of yourself. You can still be as, you know, wild as you want to be. You can still dabble and try new things. We're not trying to suck the life out of you. We're just saying there's other ways to do it, right? There's so many other ways that you can still try new things and still try on different personalities and still have the trend of the moment without having to own it and then throw it away next season.
Yeah. I mean, that idea of commitment, you know, I often say to people, you wouldn't buy like a house plant without having an intention of keeping it alive,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, if you buy a plant, or let's say a hamster or something, you intend to give it water and light and whatever it needs.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have the best intention of keeping that plant alive.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we buy clothes knowing full well that we might wear them twice and then throw them out, you know, or just let them languish in the back of our wardrobe? And it's completely what you said, you know, I think we have to have that commitment. If every time we went into a shop and bought an item of clothing, we had to sign some kind of document that said, I promise, you know, I will, in sickness and in health, I will love, honor and cherish you. I will replace your buttons. I will sew up holes. I will take you to, you know, be mended. I will wash you according to the instructions and not too much and on a low heat. And I will think about taking care of you. I will hang you up on a hanger rather than just leaving you on the floor. All of that stuff. And also committing, I guess, you know, at such a time when, you know, maybe you are kind of done with that piece, to passing it on in a responsible way, you know, giving it to a friend or donating it to a thrift store, or kind of selling it on eBay and kind of sending it off into the sort of circular economy. Like, I just think, yeah, we need to kind of expect more from people in terms of committing to our clothes. We need to really challenge ourselves to commit to them like they are a relationship, because you know, somebody else has had a relationship with that item before it got to you.
You just reminded me, I worked for Diane von Furstenberg for a couple of years in New York, and you reminded me of something she would always say to us, which is that, you know, my clothes are my friends. You know, I open up my closet and I see all my friends, you know, and that ability to, I think, again, it goes back to respecting the clothes, to respecting the life they've had, and to respecting the life they've given you. And to then, you know, sometimes it's okay to make peace and pass on and let them go have another life, you know, with someone. But if you're letting them get soiled and torn and just neglecting them to the point that they have to be thrown away, you know, that's not how you would treat your hamster or a friend, someone you love. So we need to just kind of, you know, add more emotional engagement to the things that we own, and, you know, really understand it. I think it comes back to like being grateful and just kind of saying like a little thank you. Like when you pull the clothing out to put on, you know, thank you for making me feel so fabulous when I wear you. Thank you for, you know, making me look so good, you know, in the wedding photos. Thank you for having so much fun with me, and just kind of creating that relationship, because it really does make you like think twice about how you treat it and take care of it better. You know, so I like the idea of just kind of giving more respect to our clothes.
Absolutely. I think also not being, again, it sort of sounds contradictory, but it's this part of the same, not being too hung up on perfection as well. So I think, you know, a lot of my clothes will maybe have little holes, or, you know, maybe there's a loose thread somewhere. Maybe I've taken it up myself, the hem, and it's not professionally done, and maybe if you look closely it looks a bit ropey. But I think particularly for kind of younger generations coming through, there is this real perfection anxiety, and I think that's so true of so many areas of society, and we're really having to kind of confront that. And you know, it's I read that apparently with Generation Z there is a real thing about throwing all of your clothes in the laundry basket every single time you wear them, whether or not they need it, whether or not they've, you know, they're not dirty, they smell fine, but they will just put them in the laundry basket every time. And I wonder if that stems from this societal pressure to be constantly presenting this flawless exterior. Do you know what I mean? It does feel like there's a lot tied up in that. And I think that, you know, part of the reason people are maybe squeamish sometimes about buying clothes from thrift stores is that they worry they're not perfect, you know, that maybe there's a tiny mark on them, or maybe they're a little bit faded, or maybe you will need to kind of, you know, do a repair or something before you can wear that. And people are nervous of that because we've got so used to thinking of clothes as these things that should be just like shiny and squeaky clean and box fresh all the time. And as soon as they're not, we just discard them because we can afford to just go and buy new ones from the store. So yeah, I think there's something to be said as well for making peace with that slight lack of perfection, and just loving your clothes anyway.
Well, and I think, you know, the marketing pushes on us such a need to conform. and to be accepted. And what I personally love so much about vintage fashion is that I can find something that I know, if I can open it up and see the seams and I can tell it was handmade, then I know that there is zero chance that anyone else will ever be wearing this. I could wear this to any wedding, any party, any event, and no one's going to be wearing it. And so for me, you know, it's about it being vintage and having those flaws is what makes it so special, because it's absolutely unique. You know, the way that it's worn in tells a story about the life it had and how it was used. And it's ironic, right? Because we want things to be perfect, yet we pay extra money for distressed jeans. We pay extra money for jeans that were, you know, for anyone that thinks that a distressed jean was made that way, it was made as a jean and then it was ripped and torn and pounded and bleached and lasered. So we want to buy it new, but we want to make it look like it's been worn, when we could just buy something worn and it's already been done for us, you know? So we want the leather jacket, but we want to look like Steve McQueen wore it, so it needs to have all the fading. So go buy a vintage one and it's already done, right? Like, it's just, I think it goes back to, we're running low on time, so I want to bring this back to this point of, you know, that you talk about normalizing outfit repeating, normalizing wearing someone else's clothes, normalize wearing something secondhand, normalize shopping, you know, because from the brands and, you know, from our, you know, capitalist economy, we've been taught this message that, to your point, everything must be new and shiny and perfect. And again, it's not our fault, you know, it's not our fault. This is the message we've heard and the expectation that we want to live up to because we want to be accepted. We want to fit into this society that shares, you know, stuffs this message down our throat. But we all have a responsibility. And when we close, I'm going to read your quote to end this, but we all have a responsibility to be active about normalizing these behaviors. Because if we show our outfit repeats on social media, whoever's following us, you know, you never know who you're impacting. And someone who's following you might be emboldened to say, oh, well, she always wears the same thing and she doesn't worry what people say, or she doesn't, you know, worry what anyone thinks. And they might even be inspired. Oh, look, she wears it with different shoes every time. She wears it in the summer, in the winter. She does her hair differently. And we can normalize this idea of these sustainable behaviors until it gets to the point where there's no stigma and it's not considered a bad thing, but it's a badge of pride. And you know, it's something to be proud of.
Completely. And I mean, I think, you know, trends catch on quick, like we know this, and actually you can make something a social trend with not that many people, you know. It's like if 3 of your friends are doing something, it's a trend, it catches on. I mean, my dream for outfit repeating particularly is that we should get to a stage where I think I wrote an article saying that when you wear a dress that everybody has seen many times at previous parties, you should feel like Paul McCartney striking up Hey Jude on the piano. You know, you should walk into that party and everyone should be like, it's that dress, I love that dress, I'm so glad you wore it, it's my favorite. You know, we should feel like that. If we love an item of clothing, why wouldn't we wear it loads? Why wouldn't we kind of give it that life? And I think again, going back to social media, which I do think has you know, I think it has a lot to answer for, but I also think that it could potentially have a really positive role in driving that kind of change. And I think we are slowly starting to see more and more people on social media kind of rejecting that idea that every, you know, outfit on the grid has to be a new outfit. It's ridiculous. You know, our parents and our grandparents didn't buy into any of that rubbish. Like, the average woman, I think I've got this in the book, the average woman in the 1930s had 9 outfits in her life. And that was it, you know. And if you went to a party, you wore your party dress. And I think, you know, all it takes is a few kind of influential people. Maybe I would love to see more celebrities doing it. Like, it still makes headline news every time a celebrity wears a dress they've worn on the red carpet before. That should not be headline news. That should be something we are accustomed to seeing. And I would love to see more of them stepping out of those designer sponsorship deals and just wearing something again. But yeah, we can all start doing that. We can make it normal. We can sort of cheer when our friends wear the same things again and again. I really think, yeah. And
that support is so critical to it as well. You know, when someone else, you know, I have no problem doing that, right? And I'm secure in doing that. But And if you feel in that place, that's great. But to have an even bigger impact, cheer the people on in your life who are repeating something, and let them know that you noticed and that you think it's cool. You know, don't let it go by unnoticed, because then the worst they think is, oh, they saw me in this again and they didn't say anything, they're judging me or whatever. Just, again, normalize it. Be like, yes, I love that dress. I'm so excited to see it again. You always look so good in it. I was hoping I would see you in that, you know, and just kind of make it more fun. Okay, I'm gonna read one of your quotes to close, but actually let me read it and then I'll let you offer your own closing. So direct quote from How to Break Up with Fast Fashion by Lauren Bravo. I'm gonna leave you guys with this and then let Lauren sign off herself. So, on social media, at the bus stop, in the changing rooms, and in the festival loo queues, we call these different things, of course, we need to be raving about our secondhand finds, applauding the outfit repeaters, offering to mend each other's buttons. It feels like the best way to keep fashion as an expression of culture and creativity, not a contract we're bound to against our will. Sharing is caring, and collaboration is the best chance we have of taking on the shady conglomerates, calling out the exploiters, championing the little guys, borrowing that killer outfit, locating the magical charity shop, getting our skirt hemmed, discovering an ocean-friendly fabric, and helping that lovely social enterprise get off the ground, and finding out how to get that gravy stain out of our massive societal shift dress. No one person can do it all perfectly, but between us all, we could have this covered. The pressure's not on you, whoever you are watching. It's something that we can all do together. So thank you so much. What would you like to leave our audience with?
I mean, I guess it's that idea that, you know, you should never think you are only one person and that your actions can't make a difference, because actually, I believe the only way that we can do this is together. So never believe that by quitting fast fashion you are somehow stepping away from society and community. Actually, society and community is the way that we drive this forward and make change on the massive scale that we need to see it. And you can do that while still looking fierce.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. I think we could talk for hours and hours and hours. So thank you everyone for listening. I'm glad we got in what we did. You can purchase Lauren's book, How to Break Up with Fast Fashion. I got mine on an e-reader. You can purchase the physical copy. She's got other books that you can look into. If you're interested in the Spice Girls, there's lots to read about that. And we look to see more from you. And thank you for supporting our Remake community. You guys can go to remake.world to learn more about how you can host swaps, how you can support our Pay Up campaign, all kinds of cool activations. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Lauren. And everyone take care. Bye guys.
Bye.